Karie Willyerd. Read my bio. I'm a 6-time Chief Learning Officer, most recently for Visa. I'm head of strategic engagements for GP Strategies now in a fractional role. I've won the ATD Best Award, #1 position twice. I think I'm the only CLO who's taken 2 companies, both Sun and Visa, to the #1 position. And I'm an author of a couple of international best-selling books, and I'm the last page columnist for Training Magazine. But I also publish for ATD, so the September-October issue is going to have some of this topic plus more if you want to follow along. So I'm going to start by saying this is not an AI talk, even though I'm talking about the AI era. It's really a talk about leadership. It's about capability and judgment and change in a jagged world that is created by AI. And we'll talk about what does a jagged world look like in just a minute. So leaders often describe AI as a speed problem, but I think the deeper problem at the moment is instability and unstable assumptions and unstable capability and unstable confidence about what comes next. It's not really the pace of change it's bad, but there's something even deeper than that I'd like to explore with you today. So what I hope you'll leave with, because I want you to rate this well, that I listed the objectives and I fulfilled the objectives, if nothing else. Why change models break in a jagged world. I'm going to give you a tool from a researcher from Colorado State on navigating competing timelines. What does leadership need to do differently now, and what's that mean for leadership development? And then some tips for yourself for staying competent. I hope you'll pick up some of those tips as we go along. I've already warned those who came early that the best exercise is going to be given to the front of the room. The medium exercise for this in the back of the room gets what you get. Okay, so let's talk about the jagged technological frontier and change. This is an article that was done with Harvard Research. It's, in tiny little font here. At the end, I'll give you my LinkedIn thing, and if you want your citations, I can send you the citations. But the jagged frontier is, when you think about it, we know what human performance looks like. That's that white dotted line. For example, somebody just broke the 2-hour record on a marathon. Right? We didn't think that was possible, but it was something to be beat by 20 seconds. And so we know what humans are capable of. That's a reliable, confident state for us. We know how hard to push a kid when they're learning how to ride a bike. AI is different because it's developing in uneven ways in its capability. In some things, it's way better than humans. And in some things, it's way worse than humans. And that's kind of unpredictable. We're surprised we can be so good at some things and so good and so weak at other things. But then just as soon as you know what it's good at and what it's not good at, it changes. So this jagged frontier is changing almost every day. There's a really great research paper on this that is cited in here that I recommend is a fundamental article for understanding where AI is at now in terms of human capability. They did it with Boston Consulting Group and studied researchers. So it's a really great article. So change is not just faster, it's unpredictable. Fast change is really hard. And unpredictable change is harder even because it makes planning, leadership, and capability building that much more difficult. And in the two, if we're doing a from to, the two keeps moving. In the past, we could often define a future state and build towards it. But now the future state is evolving as we move. And it's not evolving next month or the month after. It is evolving every day. So defining the two state just keeps moving. And most of our change models start with where are you at now? Where do you want to go? And how do you get there? So there's a from and a to. So almost everything we've been trained in terms of how change models work are not as effective in a space where to is so difficult to define. For example, one of the most original change models, Kurt Lewin, was it was to unfreeze where you're at in the current, make the change, and then refreeze. You can see, well, that's not going to work. Or because if you freeze back ends, then you're doomed because it's going to change the next day. Or John Cotter's work, the 8 steps of change, ends with, build it solidly into the culture. Well, as soon as you start building it into the culture, you're going to go back to the company and say, we got to change our culture again. So these change models are just very difficult to deal with. So we need something a little different in terms of how we're managing change in a world of today. These models also assume that there's this shared starting point. And actually, if we were all in the same company working together, we'd all have different perspectives to begin with. They assume that there's a clear destination and that you can outline a program management office with a special room and a special team that are going to have a stable path between them. And some companies are treating AI like that. And I think they're going to find it challenging because things are changing so quickly, or it's going to be a permanent program management office. So each of these assumptions is under pressure in today's era. I'm kind of covering change management first because leaders are expected to drive change. And so I want to get to then what are the implications for leaders. But first, what if to can't be defined? Because it's not just that the AI capabilities are changing, but business models are changing as a result. So there's not a company in the world that isn't worried about their business model, except maybe the AI companies, the AI frontier models, but they're still not making money. So they're probably worried about their business models as well. So the destination's being invented as we move. And what if from isn't shared? I think we've now realized that people bring many more perspectives to work than before. People have come from different companies. People have different backgrounds. And so they've got different histories, scars from prior change things, interpretations of past changes. So when from is contested and to is shifting, the change models just oversimplify reality. They can still help, these traditional change models, but they're insufficient when neither the starting point nor the destination is stable. One leader sees AI as a threat. One to their company and to their business model. One leader sees it as a threat to their own job. One leader sees it as with total optimism. So everybody comes in it with different perspectives. So I think we need a different set of tools for doing that. And we're having to then align across competing realities. So we've got competing realities of where's it going to be, because nobody knows. And if anybody thinks they do, they're wrong, or just right only by pure serendipity. But what we can do is start to think a little bit about where's the from. Could we align across the from? Can we align around the present? And hopefully that'll help us anchor towards the future. So I'm going to do an exercise. This is the one where I said I was going to divide the room into 3. And so we'll do the front of the room to, okay, we've got a baseball cap here, right here on the aisle. That's the front of if you're forward of, thank you for the baseball cap as a marker. And then it's a little more dense in the back of the room. So, so we'll take to the, let's see. I see a blonde woman on this aisle here. Could you raise your hand? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, on the aisle. She's looking around, blonde, yes. What's your name? Susan. Okay, Susan in back. You're going to be the past. So let me tell you, we're going to have perspectives and you're going to have to make decisions in small groups near you. The people in the back, Susan in back, you're in the past. And the scenario is your company has rolled out AI in some pockets. And those pockets have seen 30% plus productivity improvement after 3 months. Leadership is excited. Okay, the back of the room, Susan back, your perspective that you're taking on as a persona is we've seen this before, and we need to protect what experience has taught us from the past. Okay, from the baseball cap back. Baseball cap, what's your name? Ryan. Ryan to Susan, those rows. Your job is to take on the persona of a leader who's thinking about the present. The results are clear. Let's scale what works now. And then in front of Ryan, your perspective is the future. What might be we losing if we go scale immediately? And how do we protect long-term capability in the company? Okay, so does everybody understand the perspective of the persona? All right, so here's your task. Just find some people around you. And here's your 2 groups of 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever feels good. And I'm going to give you 4 or 5 minutes. And I want you to answer the question, what would you do next? You've got the pilots that have been successful. Use only your persona to argue from. Would you scale faster? Would you slow down? Would you invest differently? Would you change how work happens? Would you do something else? And be able to defend your position. So not just come up with a decision, but be able to defend your position. Okay? Find a couple of folks next to you. Susan, pick someone back there to give a readout, whether it's from your team or you can turn out, you have the power to name someone. Here's a mic next to you.
Good. Fantastic. So glad that everyone's going to be able to hear this. Okay, so I got here after you had explained what this was. So what we said...
But you're a trainer, and so you can improv.
That's right. So what we said is what we would do next is, we'd look at what worked and what didn't work, and then we would keep what was working kind of spinning, and then we do, kind of an analysis on what didn't work, why didn't people like it, why didn't they learn from it, whatever the case might be. And then we would, start tweaking it, start making changes on that.
Okay, all right, cool. Anybody else who's got a past perspective want to add to that? Yeah, here's a hand over here. Lisa?
I think our overarching premise across all 6 questions was having that cautious mindset, because we have the premise of it might not be the solution. I think we also talked about really questioning if the thing that works so well was actually AI, or if there was other potential side effects or other kind of causations behind the success, because we have that mindset of, did this actually work? And is this the best option and the best solution? And so throughout that process, scale faster, we said, no, we want to slow down, really hone in on what went on and make sure that it's the right choice. Because again, we're being cautious.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. All right, Ryan, you've got the power now. So would you like to name either yourself or pick somebody in the middle group?
Name is Jason. So we kind of had the same thought, cautiously optimistic, because we thought that we're present in the now. And it's that, we saw that increase is probably the new norm, possibly. At least that's our new baseline to react on. But it doesn't necessarily mean we can scale. And we're going to see the bell curve go up. We thought it'd be more like a a stagnant change, right? So that 30% is now the new baseline benchmark to reflect on before we kind of proceed. We had a lot of good dialogue. We said, don't scale too fast. Again, be very cautious. One thing that we barely got to talk about was the people. We were considering the productivity and the efficiency perhaps on the AI, but we didn't really dig into the impact on the people and how we would think about how they would be influenced and impacted. So we don't have anything on that, but just saying that that's something that we need to think about.
Okay, cool. And Aaron, I'm going to let you pick from the front row someone to help.
My name is Kristen. From the future perspective, a lot of what you all were talking about, but we also were looking at it from a governance standpoint as well, to be able to look from a future perspective to stay as we are looking at this and we are wanting to potentially scale and see what was right, what was wrong. We also want to be able to identify that as we move forward and we expand this out, because that's how it's going to end up to be, where do those guardrails come into play and where are those checks and balances so that things can bubble up? And when we bubble them up early, we can catch them before something goes very awry. Or when we bubble things up and it's going really well, we have the ability to capitalize on that and also then tell that story and share that broadly as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Anybody else from the present or future who wants to add anything to the perspectives? Okay, were any of these perspectives wrong? No, I don't think so. I think all three are right. All three are possibilities of way to attack a problem. And that's part of what leadership capabilities are, is helping make decisions. And so, leadership change is to some degree about conflict, about time and perspective, and figuring out when things are changing so quickly, how do you begin to integrate those? Even when people have lived through the same events, they carry different versions of it. In a sense, we're all trying to solve for everything everywhere all at once, just like the movie, where we're in all of these different perspectives at the time. And the role of as a leader is to just integrate these timelines, integrate these perspectives. So this tool, the time simulator, could be used in any decision to try and get people to get their perspectives out in the open and talk about them out loud. Edgar Schein from MIT, a great change management and organizational development professor from quite a while ago, talks about having a left-hand column and a right-hand column. The right-hand column is what you say out loud, and the left-hand column is everything that you're reserving and not saying out loud. So a leader's job is to help get some of the left-hand side out into the open. And even more so when we have these so many perspectives with so much change going on all at once. We can ask the question, what are we carrying forward? What's misleading us now? Because all you have to do is pick up the newspaper to find somebody who's been misled, including a guy today who just wrote a book about AI and found that he'd used AI to help write the book, and it made up quotes and it misattributed and so on. So he has to recall his book. And what might be eroding over time? So that's a question I'd like to go into next. So as one of the things that I've had the opportunity to do, I decided, having been a chief learning officer, one reason I love the role is because I like to learn. So last year I went and got a certificate in AI and strategy from MIT. I've gone to the last 3 TED AI conferences, and it's interesting to listen to non-trainers talk about what the implications are for people. And that's led me to think about a dilemma that we're facing, which is what I'm calling the speed of AI adoption dilemma. So if you put AI adoption on the x-axis with low and high, and you think about how fast is the organization learning, how fast are the people in the organization learning, it creates your classic consultant 2x2, right? So if you're not adopting AI very quickly and you're not learning as an organization, you're probably a very present or past-oriented organization, probably not taking advantage of the efficiencies, probably not experimenting and subject perhaps to some market laggard vulnerability. But then there are organizations, I've worked at one like this, that's very experimental. So they want to go out and throw 1,000, I've heard some companies say, we're going to put 1,000 points of light out there for AI adoption. That is a strategy that some companies are using. And so you'll get some growth in the people. They're learning something, but you'll have messy workflows, low scale, low ROI on AI. So one of the things that I heard a speaker at the TED AI conference say was, there's the kind of infamous Stanford / Better Up research study that said something like 80% of all AI implementations were failing. And the folks at TED AI, who were the actual people that were the creators of these frontier models and some of the most renowned people in AI, said you would expect that because we are implementing AI faster than we've ever implemented any other technology. Therefore, if you're not failing, that's the failure. If you're not it shows you're not experimenting enough. So, every research study, you got to figure out now what else might be said in that study. And then let's move to the upper right. An organization that is adopting AI quickly and learning quickly. They're trying to integrate across timelines where they've got a human-first AI and they've preserved judgment for people learning, where systems perspectives are aligned more, learning embedded. The reason I'm keeping the eroding one to the end is because it's the most tempting to do, which is to adopt AI fast and see what happens. So you get the gain of time savings focused and high AI adoption, but you're starting to see, are they vulnerable to work slop because people don't know how to use AI sufficiently? So things are coming out that shouldn't be coming out because they're not ready yet, or you have a lot of redundancy of systems. And the scary part for us as learning professionals is that skills are eroding in this bottom quadrant because people are turning to AI, not being trained on how to use AI, not just the tool, but how to be a better thinker with AI. And so their skills erode and we'll talk more about what that means in a minute. So that stalled organization tends to be past dominant, slow AI, low learning velocity, and their risk is irrelevance. That's when the past kind of dominates. A future dominant organization is that experimental, lots of pilots, high learning energy, but there could be a risk of fragmentation. The eroding organization, the present is kind of the dominant perspective there. So fast AI adoption, lots of output gains, but the risks are capability erosion, and it's going to show up as work slop because does everybody know the term work slop? So work slop is a term, I think, coming out of that Stanford Better Up study. I had an email sent to me summarizing an event I'd been at and just asked me to check it to make sure it was okay to send out to the people who had been at the event. And when I started reading it, I realized, they're saying this other guy made the presentation that I made. And the title of the other presentation is not what I spoke about. And, by the way, that's not my title. And, it's like everything was wrong because the person had just taken it and put it into AI to go do and hadn't given it the right things. And so that's work slop, where it's just, and there's stories in the newspaper every day about work slop. May not be called that, but it's work slop. And then the goal is not actually perfect balance, but it's to be able to kind of integrate these timelines, this past, present, future focus, and figure out how can we have intentional adoption so that people are learning at the same speed as we're adopting AI. So how can we keep people up to speed, and our organization as a collective then, where we're building capability? There are many articles out, I'm not covering them in this speech, about what happens to how we're losing mental capacity with AI. And so this capability erosion is not only at the macro level with an organization, it's at the micro level with me, myself, and I, and in terms of what we have to be careful about. So the goal is disciplined integration, and moving forward while watching out what could be lost as we build capability. Imagine this is something that Ethan Malik writes about a lot. If you don't follow him on Reddit, if you're only going to follow one person in AI, follow Ethan Malik. And he writes about, the time when we've taken many of the work processes that used to be given to brand new hires to do, and we've turned those into AI agents. So how does a new hire learn? I think these are going to be some of the big challenges for learning and development. How do we start to help people learn? Because working with AI, and I'll make this case in a moment, is going to take judgment. So how do you learn? How do you acquire judgment? You don't go to a training class only to acquire judgment. It takes a lot of experience to acquire judgment. Just one other, I'm only going to give you 2 minutes on this exercise. What quadrant do you feel your organization feels most like now? And where do you think it's headed? So if with just folks around you, I'll put here's the 4 quadrants. Where are you at now? I'll give you 2 minutes. All right, how many people in the room feel your organization is stalled? Okay, that's about a quarter of the room. How many feel your organization is an experimental organization? Okay, lots, more than half the room. Cool. How many feel that capability might be eroding because of AI adoption? Okay, that's a good chunk of the room too. And then how many feel like they've gotten to the resilient? Good handful. All right. So I think that's a nice way of thinking about where there are some trade-offs that are made with AI adoption and the speed of AI adoption, and why learning velocity is really important. Why keeping up with the pace of AI adoption is important in order to avoid the risk of losing capability not too far away from now. So with that, I want to move on to leadership, because the biggest risk in all of this is not falling behind. The biggest risk is eroding human capability. And I don't think it's on very many leaders' minds, because they're worried enough about keeping pace with the competition. It's hard to look forward into the future and say, what are going to be the impacts to people? So guess whose job that is? That's our job, right? To be thinking about what's happening to people. And as a result, I heard a really great speaker who has nothing to do with the whole leadership development perspective, but was speaking at TED AI about how leadership is going to be redefined. And so it's going to be not just managing people, but it's going to be having to orchestrate entire systems. I mean, Microsoft announced 2 weeks ago that they plan on having more AI agents than people doing work. And it's not IT that's managing those agents. It is the leader that is in the domain in which so if it's marketing, it's not IT that's managing the marketing agent. It's the marketing folks and the marketing leaders who are managing it. One of the big first shifts is moving from just managing people to orchestrating entire systems. And have we, with each of these, think of the implications for developing leaders to be ready for this. And I think this is going to be one of the most impactful ones in terms of how we think about talent development and talent rotation. Because before we could perhaps move leaders from area to area to begin to understand and learn an organization, and so they would be more generalist. But if you're managing an AI agent and you don't have domain knowledge about what that agent is doing, you are not going to be able to integrate those systems with humans. So there's going to have to be a lot more domain knowledge and domain judgment that leaders are bringing to the table. The classic things leaders have been valued for is making decisions. And now I think it's going to be more about a whole decision architecture and how do you integrate those decisions impacting one another. Where AI informs, humans can override, deciding when you override, when to exercise the judgment to override what AI is doing. It's going to be a big leadership shift. And then from performance for today, which is that present focus, to how do we protect the capability of the company to be able to compete going forward? How do we have enough human talent that's learned how to decide when to override AI, that has developed the judgment to be able to do that? So how does a leader help develop people to protect the capabilities of their own organization? And then, it used to be kind of a alignment. How do we get everybody in alignment? That would be an old change model. Let's get everybody aligned. But there's no reason for us today to have had to align the past, the present, and the future. We just have to integrate it into meaningful decisions. We have to take them all into account to help decide what's the best way to go forward. So I think leadership is going to be less about alignment and get on board with this perspective and more on how do we integrate all of the different information that's coming together from humans and from the data from the AI agents that are maybe there's more of them than there are us. And how do we integrate that together into a meaningful path forward? And so, overall, many leadership models are built on aligning and then deciding and then driving execution. That's a very common way of training our executives now. And right now, not in the future, but right now, we need to be thinking about how do we integrate across all of this? How do we design the systems and architecture that we need? And how do we protect human capability going forward? Because the human capability is what our company is made of. As one writer said that I didn't write down their name right away and I couldn't find it again, but somebody else said, if every company is being run by Claude, what's your competitive advantage? So it is going to be about your leadership and your culture and how you're working together with it, right? So leadership's role is to unleash extraordinary humans with AI in the best possible perspective and scenario. So it's less about directing activity and much more about creating a future together. So if the nature of leadership development is changing, if leadership is changing, how should leadership development change? And so I'm a fellow at Harvard's Learning Innovation Lab out of the School of Education. And they've written a lot about the need for unlearning now. So questioning what it is you trust. See, this is why this frontier is so difficult to navigate, because we learn something and we're going to have to unlearn something almost as fast as we learned it. Like if you talk to somebody, I can usually in about a 5-minute conversation with someone find out how recently they've read about AI, because they'll be saying things that are no longer true about AI. And so I know, or no longer generally true. So this isn't something you can just like watch on the sideline and update every 6 months and feel like you're on top of the topic. So leadership development is going to have to change too. So what are leaders going to have to unlearn? That speed is equal to competence. That's not true. Speed is not equal to competence now, because people are using AI to go faster, but that doesn't mean they're better. But it kind of used to, that experts worked faster, or that output is equal to progress. And that, there's a lot of companies, you've read about them in the news, that are measuring how much people are using AI, how many clicks they're doing into AI, how many tokens they're consuming. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're learning while doing all of that. They can just be in that bottom right quadrant working to adopt AI faster, but producing more slop. And for example, the work slop in that email scenario for me, something that should have taken me probably 90 seconds to review and approve was probably about 45 minutes of back and forth, trying to, train a new person on what they needed to do and how they should work with AI. So some new ideas to embrace are for leaders are that performance can improve in the short term while we're actually degrading capability in the organization. And that has not been true in the past. And that leaders' job isn't to scale AI, they're actually scaling the context for the entire organization on how AI is going to be effective in the organization. And that we can't outsource judgment. Now, AI is getting better and better. The keynote speaker from Monday, we had a chance to be in a room with him after the keynote. And what he said in the after party was when somebody said, well, there's always going to be human plus AI. There's going to be a human in the loop. And he said, well, where's the human at the traffic light that you go through and rely on every day? Okay, well, eventually there's a human, but it's so far back in the system. You better have designed the traffic light system really well, because the human is way far removed and comes in only when major alerts are on. So you have to be careful about what do you outsource to AI. And it shouldn't be judgment. And I think there's a new call for learning leaders to come to the table with conversations about this. And it's not going to happen through micro-learning, which has been such a big focus or learning in the flow of work, because I think we're going to have to build real thinking capabilities and judgment capabilities for people. And that's going to mean more than just micro-learning has a role, but there's going to need to be simulations and thinking competitions and so on that are just much more sophisticated for ensuring that we have mastery. So finally, I want to give you some takeaway and tips for staying competent. And I'm going to borrow from, first off, that article that I told you about before from Harvard. They proposed some terms in regards to how people were working with AI. And other organizations have picked up and other researchers have done things on that. So what happens when people actually work with AI? And this is from a researcher named Vivian Ming. It showed up in the Wall Street Journal. But what they found is they gave 100 folks in the Silicon Valley the task of coming up and making predictions. And they wanted to see, could humans do it better or could AI do it better? And so now multiple studies are starting to come up with the same thing. The humans who worked alone as individuals to do predictions fared the worst. But AI alone was a little better. Then in the next two, they put people in teams. And those who were working with AI, so a hybrid team, were still worse than AI alone. But a few teams, 5 to 10%, had the best performance and outdid AI. So just think about that a second. What do you think those 5 to 10% of teams did. They argued with the AI. So what was happening with the hybrid teams that didn't is they were proposing an idea to AI, and most AI still has sycophantic behavior, wants to please you. So it reinforces your decision that you've told it. But if instead you argue with it and you whatever it comes up with, you ask it to defend, you ask it, so you spar with AI, they got the best results. And so that's actually been repeated. And in the original study that HBS did, they found that there were three kinds of ways of working with AI. And by the way, this is not tools. So this is training, or could be training, about how do you think when you work with AI, not how do you use a tool to use AI. Because what they found is the worst work product in that first study was for people who just gave AI a task. Write a report based on all of this data that I'm giving you to present to the client for how this project went. So they gave it one task, and that they called those completer mindsets. And then there were people that were cyborgs. And those people broke the tasks up and gave AI a portion at a time. And then what this woman found is those cyborgs that actually sparred with AI as they went through it got even the best results. And then the third category they called was centaurs, which is people who reserve the decision-making and the strategy and only let AI execute on it. And actually, everybody can work in all three modes. Some tasks, write an email, you don't need to break all of that up, for example. You can, unless it's an email to me about what I spoke about. So, but I want to show that because it's, a lot of us are putting together, we're asked as a company at GP to put together curriculum for people, and a lot of the curriculum that people are requesting is about how to use the tools. And the real threat is going to be, how do you think differently, and how do you work with AI as an partner, not just learning like how do you use cloud software. It's not the same as in the past. So the difference in these studies for the best performers wasn't AI, it was how they worked with AI. In the first study, by the way, they found that the people who improved the most with AI were the worst performers, which is actually quite wonderful because it means that it improved their performance 47%. The top performers, it improved their performance by 17%. So everybody's performance went up with AI, but the worst performers went up the most, which I think is a really interesting to be thinking about. To say it very shortly and bluntly, the key point here is not whether they used AI, but whether they used AI as an answer machine or a sparring partner. So, and how are you using AI? As an answer machine or a sparring partner? People say, people today are saying, do you talk nice to your AI? So I do talk nice to my AI, but I argue with my I work on 4 models, and I argue with all of them to just see who, and I train them. I don't want you to tell me how wonderful I am. I have other people who could do that. So the cyborg pattern is challenging it, asking for counter arguments, interrogating, and stay in the thinking. And those high performers in this last study, what they found in terms of perspectives that they had were intellectual humility. So they're arguing with it, but they were arguing not because they're saying I'm right and you're wrong, but just sparring with it to bring it, using curiosity and taking on different perspectives. So that's a whole skill to train people on. Like, how do you, and people, you don't get to sit and watch how I work with AI. I don't get to sit and watch how you work with AI. It's all done right now. I mean, soon we'll be doing all through talking out loud. But right now, it's it's something we have to let each other learn, because we're on a frontier. Just like in Star Trek, you've gone out into this frontier and you're exploring new worlds. The way frontiers have always been conquered is by people learning from one another what works. This pass works. If you go over this pass in the wintertime, you're going to be eating each other. The Donner Pass. So, lastly, so for yourself, just some tips for yourself. I think judgment is one of the most important things that we're going to be needing to develop. So how are you developing your own judgment? And I think that means you've got to stay close to the domain and slow down when it matters most. Like when you see this is going to be a really important thing where I can learn, how am I sparring more with my AI? How am I understanding how am I making it defend its positions? And then explain your own reasoning out loud to you and others. I think in the article that's upcoming in September, October, I talk about different scenarios in which we can embed this kind of judgment development into training simulations and work. Continue to do some work without AI. And then, of course, always verify before trusting your AI output. So the greatest trick is, I hope I've persuaded you, isn't falling behind. It's eroding capability while it looks like it's progressing. And your job in talent development is to prevent that. Not by slowing AI down, but by making sure humans keep developing alongside it. You guys ready for that challenge?